and to understand Turkey's fight against the Feto terror organization and the challenges it faced so far, I'm joined by Nagehan Alci, who is a journalist at Haberturk, and Vehbi Baysan, who is a lecturer at Haldun University. Joining me from Brussels, Laura Batalla, who is a political analyst and the Secretary General of European Parliament Turkey Forum. I would like to welcome you all and thank you for joining me on Straight Talk. Vehbi, let me start with you. Sure. 3 years passed since the failed coup, and during that period, Turkey's relations with some of its Western allies deteriorated. So what kind of an impact July the 15th had on Turkey's relations?
Well, I think this is a perception problem. First, including countries in the European Union and at the wider scope, even United States, didn't give the necessary importance what had happened that night. It's sort of like a surreal. I mean, we don't blame them because at the beginning, even those who went to the streets just to defend their freedom and democracy, although all these, I'll give you more details on the warplanes opening fire and over 250 people got killed. And not to mention even the tanks rolled over them. I mean, the mutilated bodies. So it's surreal. And a few weeks later, for us, it was like, let's go back home. But it wasn't. I mean, Turkey has this bitter experience starting in 1960. And, 10, 11 years later, 1971. And again in 1980. But I personally thought that actually no more any military takeover would be possible in Turkey. All these international meetings I attended, I assured people and my students that that's it, this is over. But yet, 15 July, it came as a great surprise for everyone. Military, actually, that just they even using like those old tactics in the 1970s, 80s. First, they go to a radio to read a announcement, and as if they don't even know how many people listen to radio, and they're cutting one side of a bridge, etc. But no, it was real. It was real. I mean, it was so terrifying for us that with all that mess in the house, I lost my little girl, and then later find her hiding under blanket from all these warplanes, the noise they're making, the explosions, and the bullets, etc. Yeah. No, it was real. Yeah, now, this should be understood better by the West, that actually what they did, brutally killing all these people and injuring hundreds, was a clear sign what would they do if they succeeded. I cannot imagine that.
We're going to talk about it. So,
terrifying.
Nagehan, what do you make of it? Has Turkey been left alone, as it claims? And do you believe that the international community just remained different to what has happened in Turkey? Because as we've seen in the package, I mean, they were quite reluctant in making appropriate statements about the events. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't want to start with the blaming part. Okay. I just want to maybe remind some numbers. Professor Baysan told that there were a lot of people who got killed on that night. Yes. It was 241 people. 51. It's a very high number, and it was 2,190 people were wounded. So the numbers are very tragic, very dramatic. So we first have to remind our Western friends that Turkey went through maybe the most horrible night in the modern Turkish history. And it was a continuation of an unclosed page, we should say. You started with saying that we have a history of coups, which started in 1960. And it's actually a very interesting story for me. I was wondering what kind of similarities we could find between the 15th of July coup attempt and those coups who were already succeeded in 1960, 1971, and 1980.
So how about, as we've just mentioned earlier, how about the indifferent stance of Western allies towards Turkey after this coup attempt?
Well, of course, there are several stories and rumors about this indifference. First of all, I would like to say that this coup attempt was actually very complicated to decipher because we are talking about Feto, which is a terrorist organization, but it's not a classical terrorist organization. So it's very difficult to say where it starts and where it ends. We still don't know today about to what extent it got infiltrated into the society. So that was well, let's be optimistic and say it was difficult to say okay, this is a coup attempt, and Turkish police force, with the strength of the elected government, stand against it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, but on the other hand, I mean, the US and the European side, I mean, still refer to Fetullah Gulen, a cleric, as well as a
community leader.
yeah, as well as a political figure,
definition.
and that angers Turkey a lot. I just want to get an European insight now, because there was also a similar statement in the European Commission's report. I want to get back to Laura, as I said, for a European insight. So European Commission's report, Laura, also referred to the terror organization as a Gulen movement, and it was also slammed by Turkey. Why do you think the European institutions refrain to call this organization a terrorist one?
Well, I think a lot has been already said, that there's a confusion about this movement, and a lot of, it's difficult to understand the complexity of the movement. And I think in that regard, there has been a lack of communication and explaining how this movement came to be very close to the current government, to become an enemy. So I think it's a matter of different perceptions, and a matter of the complexity of the issue, and a lack of communication that unfortunately the dialogue hasn't been very intense in the last years, and this has created a lot of mistrust between the two sides. I think especially after the attempted coup, this mistrust has even grown bigger, and now we find each other in a situation in which we need to even talk more and engage more than we have done in the previous years, in order to overcome this mistrust and lack of communication and understanding about the complexity of the internal current politics in Turkey.
So do you believe that new confidence-building measures should be taken for Turkey-EU relations, and how do you see the current stance of Turkey-EU relations?
Absolutely, we are seeing now rapprochement. It's nothing new. I mean, in the past couple of years, we've seen how the relations, bilateral relations, especially between Turkey and some European countries like the Netherlands, especially, but also Austria and Germany, have become more normalized. But this is also important to see at the EU level, regardless, I mean, of the Commission or what the European Parliament stance is, which in a way reflects the public opinion of at the EU level. It's very important, especially to have an open dialogue with the European Parliament. As you might know, after the coup attempt, the European Parliament's position on Turkey has gradually deteriorated. We came to a point where the European Parliament this year called for the formal suspension of accession talks with Turkey. And this might be a point of no return, even if at the member state level there's no political willingness to pursue this line. But there's indeed a need to create more dialogue. Some of the channels of communication that we had in the European Parliament, like the Joint Parliamentary Committee, where the Turkish parliamentarians meet with their European counterparts, have been in a deadlock for 3 years. There were no such meetings where the two counterparts could come together and discuss the challenges on both sides of the relationship. Fortunately, towards the end of the mandate, this was relaunched. So now it's possible to reconvene under this framework, and hopefully in the current mandate that just started last week, we will see more willingness to engage in a constructive relationship, to have a quality debate when it comes to EU-Turkey relations.